This is Seppo Podcast 11 with me, Rémy Miller. And today we'll be looking at the book The Age of Unreason by Charles Handy. Now, of course, that is a play on the book The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine, in which he talks about deism, essentially. And this book's purpose is really to point out what it is which we're doing in certain ways that we don't need to do in those ways. And there are a lot of examples out there where we take a method of doing something as just raw tradition, and it doesn't actually have any or little or less than we think real world implication for how things should work out. So this book is quite valuable in the sense that it will have you rethink what you take for granted, and you really don't realize what those things are until you come across them. I think that's what taking something for granted is, which of course is very useful as a thing to do because there are only so many things that we can pay attention to. There are many ongoing incoming stimuli in our environment, and some of those, like the threats or things that are imbalanced, are going to require a lot of attention. So then it becomes a matter of equilibrium in the mind and in the body regarding paying attention to those things and not getting wrapped up in how much gratitude you have for everything else all of the time. Now, of course, it's necessary to do that. It's a bad thing usually that we frown upon to take something for granted, whether it's a person, a relationship, or an object, an item that gives you good continued use, or the health and flourishing of the people you know, or the things that are going right in your life. And we should keep those in mind. But of course, there is an evolutionary reason why it occurs in the first place. So that is what I value in this book, and I think we should jump right in. So, in the book here, circumstances are now once again, I believe, combining in curious ways. Change is not what it used to be. The status quo will no longer be the best way forward. The best way will be less comfortable and less easy, but no doubt more interesting. A word we often use to signal a certain mix of danger and opportunity. If we wish to enjoy more of the opportunity and less of the risk, we need to understand the changes better. Those who know why changes come waste less effort in protecting themselves or in fighting the inevitable. Those who realize where changes are heading are better able to use those changes to their own advantage. The society which welcomes change can use that change instead of just reacting to it. This is, of course, very applicable to personal life as well as society, as he mentions there at the end of that paragraph. It's what we can apply to ourselves, because the way you get anxiety, which is essentially what he's talking about here, is this fear of change or unexpected oncoming of change, which brings with it a variety of emotions. But one of them is definitely, the whole combination of all the emotions that arise are tinctured to some large or small proportion by anxiety, because anxiety comes up as a result of uncertainty. So it's a good skill to have, to be able to know why changes are happening and be able to predict how those changes will evolve. And this goes to a deeper element too, regarding what it is to flourish as an individual. And this comes to a very, really eschatological perspective in a lot of ways, because it pertains precisely to what it is you care about as a person. In order to be able to commit to something, you have to understand why it's important in relevance to yourself. It has to be a very selfish connection that you birth here and carry with you. So what that is so inherently tied to that, which is of course hard to do in the first place, is to figure out something that you care about such that other things can attach onto it. For example, take the basic element of exercise, this basic thing that everybody should be doing. And I know I should be doing it too. And it's not easy. A lot of times it's not like I'm super hyped every day to wake up and run for a few miles and do weight resistance or do yoga to work on my flexibility. It's not like I'm super hyped to do that, but I've anchored it, I've tethered it very tightly to something else that I do care about, which is not feeling like a piece of crap. That's what motivates me to exercise oftentimes, is not I will feel better after exercising. It's rather I will feel worse if I don't exercise. So I know that it's really to avoid something bad rather than bring me, it's the stick rather than the carrot, essentially. And I know that when I feel good, I'm able to do the things that I want to do to a better capacity, and that brings me joy. So I know that exercising in this example is something that has so many other knock-on effects in my life that if I avoid it, it will only bring me more misery, and I don't want more misery, so that's why I do it. And when you form a why that is sufficiently powerful for yourself, that's when you're going to go along with it. In the past, I was very spotty with exercise because I would use reasons for doing it, like it's good for you and I know I should do it, and health, general health. And yes, all those things are true, and they are in some way glued to the reasoning there, to the good why, the big why, they're attached. But at the end of the day, that really only got me through 2 or 3 weeks, and I did not find a good enough reason why to attach it to my willpower, essentially, because you have the will for almost anything. There, of course, I'm not there through no matter of sheer will am I going to be a competitive weightlifter. That's not in my genes. If it were, I would be doing something approximating that at this point. So that's why I say almost. For the most part, it's a matter of will, and that will comes from why. Will comes from why. So knowing the why of what you're doing, the reason the change must occur, and the better the future it will bring is the infinite motivation you need. If the change isn't working, you don't have the right why. And on an adjacent but slightly separate note, it's important to adapt to the world, not make the world adapt to you, because that's an incredibly, of course, cynical way of going about relationships and personal pursuits, whatever it is you happen to want to do, because that means that you are exerting, there is the behavior of having an inner locus of control and an outer locus of control. And that means when you have an inner locus of control, it means that you have an intrinsic tendency to explain how situations turned out. So instead of you getting the raw deal of something, maybe you didn't get the project you wanted at work, or you didn't get that discount that you really wanted, or you got an injury of some sort and you have to recover. The people that are more stable in their ability to be successful in the domains which they value are the people which say that essentially, this is my fault because of X, Y, or Z. They say, I got this injury because I've even known for the longest time that I've been neglecting my lower body flexibility. So that's how I so easily twisted my ankle and put myself out for 2 weeks. Or it could even possibly go on to major injuries too. People do that where they say, instead of making themselves the victim of the moment and saying, I didn't get that discount because the cashier was the meanest person I met all month. And you can make those assertions, but they're ultimately excuses, because at the end of the day, that doesn't solve a problem. If there's something that's occurring which requires some type of solution for it to be in a better condition, what's necessary for that is assessing, what can I do next time in order for it to be in that better condition? Saying that all these things in the external environment were what caused it is what's going to cause stagnation, because the environment's going to be as it is. The world's going to be as it is. And if you can't figure out some way to move your fulcrum in that situation as to gain the most amount of leverage to bring better states of being for yourself, then your contentment and optimism and love will evaporate very quickly. Back to the book here. He's going on about organizations, like companies, and he breaks down a predictable and sad sequence. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the context to that, and then these points. So back to the book. For those in charge, continuity is comfort, and predictability ensures that they can continue in control. Instinctively, therefore, they prefer to believe that things will go on as they have before. Revolutions, as Munker Olson has argued, may be required in order to unblock societies and shocks, to galvanize organizations. Perhaps that is why Britain, untouched by revolution for over 300 years, and preferring that the status quo be the way forward, may foster organizations that too often learn too late. Major change in organization seems to follow a predictable and sad sequence. Fright, the possibility of bankruptcy, takeover, or collapse. New faces, new people are brought in at the top. New questions, study groups, investigations into old ways and new options. New structures, the existing pattern is broken up and rearranged to give new talent scope and break up old clubs. And new goals and standards. The new organization sets itself new aims and targets. Now, of course, with any change comes a reaction. That's what happens. There's a stimulus and there's a response. And this binary setting has described human development for the longest time. And we can think about it even within the past few hundred years to bring it to greater relevance, because there has been movements always contrast or somehow object to the previous era. So there was realism and surrealism. There was the contrast to romanticism, and then the contrast to modernism, and then every single era that comes has its contrast. So it's impossible to ignore the fact that humans often work in these dichotomies, in these contrasting states, and these reactions, the sequence that Handy discusses here: fright, new faces, new questions, new structures, and new goals and standards. It's very much a breakdown and an understanding of what's going to happen in an organization when change occurs. Now, it's important to be mindful of this stuff, of course, as to not fall into it. And maybe that's why bosses of companies prefer things to be done in the quick and easy way with which they're familiar, because continuity is comfort, and they want to minimize their perceived risk loss aversion. So there is the back in my day type of thinking that this is how we did it, and that's what they know. So that's going to give them what they think is going to be the quickest way to resolve a problem. But in fact, there could have been new discoveries, developments over time, which makes their way antiquated. And that's often the time, by the time you are the lowest level person in an organization to the time you're the CEO of the organization, that is years and years that have passed. So there are invariably going to be many revisions to what has been deemed effective at the time when you were learning how to do them. So it's important to stay on top of that change, monitor the change, and otherwise understand what it is you have to do to adapt rather than simply fall into what you know. Back to the book here. The creative upside down. So this is one concept that he talks about a lot and probably outlined earlier in the book. This is page 25, so he probably already discussed it, is what it is that means upside down thinking, because he uses this term a lot, upside down thinking. And it is a phrase which describes his whole argument for this book, which is we need to look at things upside down in order for us to understand exactly what's going on here and what's valuable. So back to the book. The creative upside down thinking of such people is the premise on which this book is built. New ways of thinking about familiar things can release new energies and make all manner of things possible. Upside down thinking does not have to aspire to the greatness of Einstein or to the all-embracing doctrines of Marx. It has its more familiar variants. The person who decides to treat every chore as an opportunity for learning discovers that cooking can be a creative art, chopping wood a craft, childcare an educational experience, and shopping a sociological expedition. The organization which treats people as assets requiring maintenance, love, and investment can behave quite differently from the organization which looks upon them as costs to be reduced wherever and whenever possible. Upside down thinking changes nothing save the way we think, but that can make all the difference. This is a great description of, and maybe he talks about it later in the book, or maybe I'm thinking of it a different source entirely where this is mentioned. I think it is in this book, actually. Maybe it's highlighted later on, which is the fact that what changes a society is ideas. Ideas are the petroleum which fuels reconsiderations of all of our systems. And when you think of anything that has had a major change over time, it's come from an idea. It's come from somebody saying, hey, this is not the way we should be doing things, and we should be doing things a different way. That's how every revolution has started. That's how every political swap has gone down, is by an idea being planted in the mind of an individual and propagating into the minds of others. So when you gain a skill, a mastery, a practice in the field of using words, and therefore exfiltrating those ideas from your mind into the world in a way that you will think will be meaningful to others, is to be is to be competent and is to be powerful in that way when you can articulate. And that's why I write, because those that change history are those who change the way we think. As he mentioned with Marx, also someone like Sigmund Freud, for better and worse, our thoughts change by encountering new language. If we're hearing the same things all the time, that's what you think about someone who's stuck in their ways, is they say the same things all the time. They think the same things. They agree with the same sources. They don't go on an expedition outside of their comfortability. That's what we think of someone when they're stuck in their ways. So it's by encountering new language. It's also new experiences which can influence ideas, but ultimately those ideas are expressed in language most of the time. Sometimes you can have an experience that is only clearly demonstrable in art or in music or in some other creative means. But the filter through language is oftentimes there, unmistakably. Back to the book here. This is a subsection called The New Intelligentsia. And intelligentsia is almost has come to be a derogatory term for people who value knowing things but are essentially only book smart and don't actually do anything noteworthy that is a contribution. That is my understanding of it. In a contemporary context, I may be slightly mistaken, but let's see what the book has to say about it. The second statistic is alarming in a different way. A study by McKinsey's Amsterdam office in 1986 estimated that 70% of all jobs in Europe in the year 2000 would require cerebral skills rather than manual skills. In the USA, the figure is expected to be 80%. That would be a complete reversal of the world of work some 50 years earlier. Discontinuity, indeed. It is impossible to be precise about such things. There is, to start with, no clear-cut distinction between a cerebral job requiring brain skills and a manual job needing muscles. Even simple manual jobs like gardening now require a degree of brains to understand the proper use of fertilizers and herbicides, to distinguish plant varieties, and to maintain machinery. Nonetheless, looking back at the list of occupations in the information sector in Chapter 1, a sector where brain skills of some degree are essential, it is hard not to think that 70% is, if anything, an underestimate. So that's very interesting. And he, of course, talks about the year in 2000. This is what's expected, is because this was written in 1989. A 1989 book here. So this was about a decade before the turn of the century. So these predictions were 11 years out. And I feel like at 11 years, that's when things start to get unstable. You have Moore's Law, which is incessantly creeping upon us. And the most qualified people to talk about things often have no clue what they're talking about, which makes you think perhaps you should shut up a lot of times because you don't know what you're talking about if they don't. One notable example is when nuclear fission was being worked on, where there was one guy, I don't remember his name, he was one of the leading nuclear physicists at the time, and he said it's going to be years, at least a decade, until we're able to split the atom. And it was literally the next morning. It was literally the next morning that the discovery was made. So it's important to remember that you don't always know what's going on, and it's important to stay humble. And that relates back to this because there can be this stigma against the white-collar jobs and blue-collar jobs, and there is the fact of what he's talking about, which is that so many elements of a quote unquote simple manual labor job requires brains that, you know, you got to train someone to do. It's not just any old person you can grab off the street and they'll know how to do it instantly. So it raises the question here, is the increase in average intelligence over the years congruent with the higher intelligence that contemporary jobs are increasingly demanding? Or are stupid people screwed? Because I forgot what it's called. I always forget it, and I always look it up to try and remember, and I always forget it afterwards. It's a perpetual cycle. But there's the concept in psychology, going by something's law. It was a person. It was his last name. I think not Hawthorne's law. It might have been that, but it's something similar. And it describes the increase in IQ, and it shows that every generation there's a 3-point increase in the average IQ. So when you take an IQ test, you're gonna get a score, and 100 is average. So that means an equal amount of people fall both above and below 100. And one standard deviation, I believe, is 13.6 in either direction. So once you get to 100, 113.6 IQ, that's one standard deviation, and then the numbers get smaller and smaller. So, or is it 36.2? Gosh. I shouldn't be spouting numbers if I don't know them precisely. But anyway, there is this increase over time. So I really can't offer an answer here because I'm not an anthropologist or social psychologist or anything like that, but it would seem to follow, it would seem to track that basic jobs are requiring more than basic skills, but what is considered basic intelligence is also being one-upped every generation, every approximately 25 years. So does that mean as a world we'll be able to accomplish an increasing amount as time passes? Because we will gain a constant increase in intelligence as a result of better worldwide education and lifting societies out of poverty, which is happening at a higher rate than has ever occurred in human history. So it's really something that I don't even know if I wish there was an easy answer to, but it makes you think. Maybe there is something so intrinsic about human nature that's going to keep that distribution and that proportion indefinitely. That there's something about the relationship between consciousness and cognition that implies that no matter how smart we get, even if our IQ does increase steadily across time, that there will always be the idea of the Gardner job. That is this basic job. Even though in the future, the equivalent of the simplicity of a Gardner's job may be something like a middle manager at a big company, because things will increase in scale so much that's what is, oh yeah, he's just, you know, he's making minimum wage being a middle manager at a large company, when otherwise these days that might make you a pretty penny enough to go on a vacation a year. So interesting elements there. Let's go back to the book. What will change, however, is the length of their job life. So here he's talking about, this chapter is called The Numbers, and he's talking about, he's actually just busting out some straight arithmetic here of how old a person is from working age up until retirement, and how many hours that's going to be, and how many years that's going to be, and how much you're going to be working over your whole life. And one of the upside down thinking ideas that he proposes, which I may have highlighted later on, which is this idea that maybe there can be a system where you don't work 40 hours a week until you retire and then you're done, but rather your time and knowledge, or time and skill, are inversely proportional. So when you're starting off in your career and you don't have much skill or knowledge, you have to work more in order to keep up with the pace of that environment. As you get older and you put more things under your belt of what it is you understand about how that environment works, whether it's the workplace, let's just say the workplace, because that's what he's talking about, then you can not retire, but you can go in 1 day a week. You can work 1 work day, or you can do 2 half days in a week on a Tuesday and Thursday. And because you're this old fart that just knows everything, I mean, I work in an industry where people work till quite an old age, because it's not something that's physically demanding, and it's also a creative design oriented field, so people want to keep doing it into their old age, and people often die not having ended their careers because they just keep working because that's what they enjoy, and that's amazing. So you always get these extreme, these incredibly senior people that are, in their 70s still working, and they just know everything about everything. And it's incredible to see that. And that can be used. These people don't have to work every day. They can enjoy the latter half of their life. And of course, they can continue to work those hours if they want, if they have other things that they don't want to fill their time with, other personal projects and pursuits and hobbies and such. Then yeah, just go in a little bit of the week and have your knowledge relied upon, because you have crossed that threshold where instead of being negative for knowledge and time, you cross that 0 mark, that 0 threshold, and now your knowledge is in greater demand than your time. So that's how you can use yourself in some way. So that is the concept, the general concept that he's discussing here. So, returning to the text here, what will change, however, is the length of their job life. To get one of those increasingly rare jobs in the core or the professions, less than half of all jobs by 2000, they will need to be both well qualified and experienced. In Germany today, a 6 or 7 year university course is piled on top of 18 months of military or community service, so that the average entrant into the job market is 27 years of age. In the USA, a postgraduate qualification of some sort after a 4-year degree is increasingly becoming a prerequisite for a good job, making 24 the normal age at which adults begin full-time jobs. Britain still has 3-year degree courses, except in Scotland, and no military service, but employers increasingly look for further qualifications of a more vocational or professional nature, and for relevant experience in vacations or in gap years. It has, after all, been the established practice in the older professions of medicine, architecture, and the law for centuries, along 7-year mix of education, experience, and vocational training. We can expect to see it extend to many other occupations, with the result that British parents must increasingly expect to wait until the offspring are 24 or 25 before they are established in a full-time job, if that is what they want. So maybe it's not the fact that we're getting smarter as time goes by, but that demands are getting higher. And those demands are being reflected in our capacity to accomplish them. It's not so the distinction I'm making is that they're traveling in 2 different directions. What I was saying before is that the increase in average intelligence over time as a result of better systemic education and relinquishment of people in poverty that are leading to jobs which are requiring more because people are more capable of them. and therefore the average, what is considered the average job, like this, like being a gardener, becomes increasingly more complex, but rather the other way around, so that it is because society and civilizations are becoming more advanced and complex, they're requiring these roles to be filled, and the people who were the gardeners before have no choice but to step up and be middle managers. Maybe that's a phenomenon. I'm not sure in which direction it flows. And so that's a very interesting dichotomy there. And again, I'm not qualified to make any assessments on how it actually works. But I can certainly have the wherewithal to say that there's a confluence of the two. And it's this other thing, too, of will quality of life of care for elderly decline over time as people live longer and more older people need to be cared for? You know, am I going to be screwed in the future because medicine has advanced to the point where we can live older, but that also implies this idea of more older people needing to be cared for? Or is it going to be the opposite, that fewer older people are going to need to be cared for because health and medicine and just personal well-being seems to be better clarified and propagated? For example, in the United States now, there's, of course, major pandemics of unhealthy phenomenon traits that are a result of poor lifestyle choices. And of course, there are a million reasons for the poor lifestyle choices, some more significant or traumatic than others, but they are lifestyle choices nonetheless. And there seems to be a push against that in terms of the various, you know, activist reforms out there and government agencies trying to, in this example, propagate what it means to eat healthier and to be physically healthier and such. So I'm not sure which direction it's going to go. And if people are starting their careers later and later, does that mean that it means we have to take advantage of a smaller amount of time? You know, instead of working from 16 to 60, now people are working from 24 to 60. And is that gap, that window, going to continue to shrink, where perhaps people are preparing their lives for a career or for a profession until the age of 32, and this gap keeps shrinking? And that's okay because we're able to get as much done in a shorter period of time? Or does that mean that the retirement date is getting pushed back with it? So you're working 45 years of your life no matter what, but there's going to be an increasing requirement of time that's a prerequisite to be able to do that. So you're starting later and later. And then how does that coincide with what I was just talking about regarding how old people are going to start living and when they will become less personally competent to take care of themselves? There are a lot of moving elements here, which I'm unsure how to resolve, which is, I think, one of the great characteristics about this book is that it presents a lot of elements of how humans carry out society, that he questions them, and he doesn't say, I have the answers, but why are they done this way? So there are a lot of sentiments in here which will definitely conjure that. So back to the book here. The service industries of affluence are therefore ephemeral creations, which could always disappear overnight. The point, however, once again, is that the organizations they spawn are of a different kind. Because they are essentially ephemeral, they have to flex with every shift in demand. Small core staff and lots of part-time and temporary help has to be the rule. Many of them are not knowledge-intensive businesses, although some are, of course. Retailing, transport, cleaning, catering, leisure are all industries with large requirements for the competent but semi-skilled. It is here that you will find most of the 30% who do not have the brain skills for the knowledge-based organizations. It is here that you will find the bulk of the part-timers and the temporary workers. It is the growth of the service sector which has transformed the working lives of so many people in Europe and the USA because of this kind of organization, which it needs and breeds. These shifts are irreversible. The degree of affluence may increase or wane in each country, but labor-intensive manufacturing will not return to Europe or to the USA or to Japan. Knowledge-based enterprises have to be the way forward for all our countries. The more and the better the richer, whether they are manufacturing goods or providing services. The service sector will ebb and flow and local prosperity, but will never fade away. If the shifts are irreversible, so are the changes in patterns of work which they induce, and therefore the numbers with which this chapter began. A dramatic change in economic climate may slow things down, but it will not stop them. The world of change, the world of work has changed already. We need to take notice. So there are a couple things that come up here for me. And it is this, that, and these may seem a little detached at first, but they will certainly loop themselves back in. And the first thing that this makes me think of is that when you use language that is simply composed, more people can understand you. So your version of truth is also true to others. That is the most meaningful thing. And that I just thought of that because that is kind of a theme that I found in this book so far. That's what he's talking about here. And it is a concept that over time I've had to learn to adopt more so in my writing and in my speech, is speaking simply, because exactly what I said, a truth is more readily seen as the truth rather than just some piece of information when it is easy to integrate, synthesize into what's personally meaningful. When a person finds something personally meaningful, that means that it was conveyed in such a way that it had nuggets of knowledge in there, and it was simple and therefore generally applicable so that they can adopt it. It wasn't so specific and so hoity-toity that they could see where the point was coming from, but it doesn't really matter in the end, versus saying, oh man, I really see the basic truth of what's going on there, and this is how I see that in my life. So there is that importance. Another thought I had here is that great suffering is a powerful learning experience. If you can survive it. It's about adopting discontinuity before you must, and more prosperity will come to you that way. Because discontinuity is another concept that he talks about here, which I'll actually read right now. The message, I hope, is clear. The times are changing and we must change with them. Yes, but how? In chapter 1, I argued that because most people do not like change, change is forced upon them by crisis and discontinuity. Thrown up against things or into new arenas, we confront new possibilities and discover bits of ourselves we never knew were there. Discontinuity is a great learning experience, but only if we survive it. So that's why I mentioned here that it's only if you can survive it. because there are some changes that will be way too extreme. And that's how things like psychosis can occur. People can just have mental breaks sometimes, and that's no good. It can also, if it's not just a total mental break into a form of neurosis, there is also traumatic events or otherwise major events which just permanently shape people. And they can sometimes seem from the outside very simple things or very unavoidable things. And whether that's true in the subjective experience of the experiencer, it's certainly true that there are a lot of things which can be mitigated in their manifestation of badness in your life. And they're totally within your scope to touch and rein in the control on to some degree or another. And that's a threshold. And that threshold lies at different places for different people. And I think that has a lot to do with maturity. What I notice, of course, I'm not saying I'm nowhere near the most mature person there is out there. There's still, I'm learning every day how much of an incompetent idiot I am and the things I'm trying to get done. When it comes to everything, personal relationships, workplace accomplishments, goals in my personal life, general health and fitness, the whole nine. But everyone has a different threshold. Everyone's on a spectrum. So there are lots of people more mature than me. There are also certainly people out there that are less mature than me. And when I look both ways, and I look both ways before crossing the street in a way, I see that it's really a matter of maturity when it comes to how can I prepare for the unexpected. That is one of the things that motivates me to stay. I'll just use the example of exercising again, is that I don't want there to be a time where my body is just out of whack, and it's because I had a simple sprain. And I notice this too, because there's so many times when I make a bad step or I do some weird movement. And I said, you know what? Guaranteed, if I did not do strength training for that part of the body and do stretching for that part of the body in order for it to function well, that would have been an easy sprain, an easy pull, an easy break even, because a sprain can lead to a breaking a bone or something like that, or completely tearing a muscle, because if you don't catch yourself at the initial shock of what's happening, then it can just snowball. You know, you step on a curb weird, you sprain your ankle, that makes your legs buckle immediately, you hit the ground, stick out your arm, and land on your radius and break your forearm. You know, like something like that can happen. Things like that do happen. And I like to think of it as I'm exercising to prevent things like that from happening, especially on hikes. I notice I go for a little jump or something like that, and I land, and my ankle goes slightly oblique, but then snaps right back into position as to be stable. And it's like, holy crap, that could have been serious, but it wasn't. So it's kind of the near injury or the near catastrophe moments that keep me in the realm of doing what I reckon I ought to be doing. So I think I had another point there. Yes, back to the point of maturity, that it is that threshold where people say for certain things, because you can be going throughout your life and you can adopt responsibility of certain things, but not for others. And it's almost quantitative how many things you take personal responsibility for, and how many dark corners you look into and stand in for an extended period of time and come to be comfortable with and control is what defines that threshold for personal assumption of everything you interact with. Because looking at people that are less mature, I look at them, and perhaps this is just a very judgmental person within myself, but I see this element of it's so easy to just adopt this change. You know, there's this stubbornness of thought that people can have sometimes, that either mild, gentle persuasion or just mild and gentle it's not even persuasion, it's just suggestion. A mild suggestion all the way up to aggressive persuasion. It doesn't matter. None of those are going to work, because their maturity is encapsulating and constricting, putting a hard barrier around the city walls of what responsibilities can be assumed. And the implication of not assuming those responsibilities is by going for the sake of convenience, is what I find is the fallback there, is that allowing for convenience is the absence of maturity. And that's not a concept that can be applied to every single thing. It's only relevant to certain contexts. But that's what I find, is that it's an element of disgust sensitivity. And you can have somebody that has a high disgust sensitivity, so takes the responsibility for putting things in order. And then there are people that have a low disgust sensitivity, and their proclivity towards bringing disorder into order is a lot lower, and therefore opt for the convenience of doing the thing that's a workaround, or the thing that seems easier, rather than actually confronting. So that's essentially what facing change is, what facing discontinuity is saying, this is discontinuous with my way of thinking. How do I have to go about being comfortable with this new way of thinking and making it work? And that relates back to maturity, which is why you have to invest in yourself when it comes to introverted feeling, seeing what's going on inside, learning about human nature, because that tells you about humans, which teaches you how to observe and learn from others, and then how to observe yourself and learn from those assessments, criticisms, judgments, praises, etc. Back to the book. This is in the subtopic called A Theory of Learning. The man stood in front of the class. "Now learn this," he said, writing an equation on the board. "We wrote it in our books. 3 months later, we wrote it out again in an examination paper. If the second writing was the same as the first, we had learnt it. I exaggerate, but only a little. That was my early concept of learning. Later on, I came to realize that I had learned nothing at school, which I now remember except this, that all problems had already been solved by someone, and that answer was around in the back of the book or the teacher's head. Learning seemed to mean transferring answers from them to me." Now that actually goes on, but that links back into another annotation. It's like back-to-back paragraphs. So I'll get to that in a moment. But addressing this right now, it's very unfortunate that this is how it works. And just as I was talking about, I believe on the last podcast, that's what disillusioned me from school, which was the fact that that's what school was like in over 90% of classes. I would say just classes as a whole, which is the information exists and you are going to acquire that information, and you have to demonstrate that that information was acquired on a long-term basis, which in fact, on a really long-term basis has not been acquired. Because there's an absence of that critical thinking, of that upside down thinking, as Charles Handy would put it, or the first principles thinking, as Elon Musk would put it. And that's how we have to approach education, but we're not in a lot of instances, unfortunately. So I did not want answers. As a human being, and I see this reflected in a lot of my behavior and personal projects and how I conduct my life in general now, which is I don't just want the answers. I want to go through the process of how this came to be and why, such that I can construct in my head why it's significant to think about this thing, relate it to myself, and then water those seeds as to make them extremely, as to fructify my future to the highest facility as I can. That's why school sucks a lot. And the way learning is marketed is in the education system is broken and misguided as a result of that. And I need to, I wrote a kind of a note to myself here where I said, I need to write a manifesto. a little bit ostentatious there with the wording, but in a way, because there's a lot about education which should just be different. And it's actually nice because I annotated this book quite some time ago. So it's nice going back and seeing what it is that I cared about in the moment, and reading back this excerpt really does make me think, you know what, I was onto something there where I need to write a manifesto on education, because I have no experience being a teacher or professor, but I certainly have experience being a student, and maybe I have a little experience in a professor adjacent capacity, because in one of my classes I was a graduate assistant, so worked a lot with the students in terms of what they could do to improve the work they've done before the final product is delivered. But that's really minuscule compared to what actual professors go through on a daily basis for years at a time, of course. But I certainly have a lot of ideas, and maybe I need to record those ideas somehow. Maybe that's a future project. I got a few ongoing right now that I need to put my attention into instead of spreading myself too thin. I need to finish more stuff. So going on to that next paragraph that I mentioned before, there was nothing about change in all of that, nor in fact was there much about learning as it really is. Real learning, I came to understand, is always about answering a question or solving a problem. Who am I? Who do I do that? How do I do this? What is the reason for blank? How does this work? How do I achieve this ambition? The questions range from immense to trivial, but when we have no questions, we need no answer, while other people's questions are soon forgotten. And he describes this circular quaternary pattern where it's an infinite cycle of question, which goes to theory, which goes to testing, which goes to reflection. And reflection goes back to questioning. That's really it really is how it works. You get all the way to reflection, and you say, oh, okay, so how did this work out? Well, I already spoiled myself there because I put it in the form of a question. But my point was going to be that when you reflect on the tests that you initially theorized, that's when you say, okay, did I think about that right in the first place? You know, now that I've got to the end, and I'm outside of this whole process in which I was embedded, what actually happened? You know, you can detach yourself from it and make those assessments. So for example, give a student some device, tell them to start with a question like, how does this work? Or what is the reason for blank? Have them use it and then write their reflections on what they learned. So I was a little vague here with the word device, but it could be something like a Rubik's Cube, or it could be just a small piece of machinery that isn't common in everyday life. You go, hey, what is I don't even know what this is. And then look at it, postulate, use it, and then cross-reference what they learned from using it with what they initially thought. And that can be very elucidating for, if you take it seriously, the super majority of cases. So let's take a Rubik's Cube. You could give them a Rubik's Cube and you could say, okay, here's this device, and then start questioning it. So you say, okay, what is this thing? Well, it's a cube. It's got 9 colors. It's got 9 faces. And I already know what a Rubik's Cube is. I know you're supposed to get all the colors isolated, but right now they all look mixed up. And you can question, like, okay, what's the purpose of this thing? It's like just a useless little toy. Do we even need this thing, quite frankly? And then you say, okay, well, it's something that you do. It's something you can fill your time with. Okay. Well, when you're filling your time doing that, what are you actually doing? You're trying to get these colors in the right spots. So, okay, I can see how that would be difficult, even if you've never used one before. I can see how that would be difficult, where all these colors are on different faces, and it seems like there's actually a lot going on here. And then you use it and you say, okay, there's actually a lot of spatial temporal reasoning required for getting everything in the right spot. And you can come up with algorithms for how to get certain squares in certain spots. And it's about logic and reasoning and patience and focus and all this other stuff. So, and it's a matter of using your digits. So it's going to create that mind-body connection. It's going to physically keep your hands active, and maybe that's important for old people so that they can keep their dexterity and their mental acuity. And then you can start to see, okay, this is just instead of going from this is a stupid little kid's toy to I can see how this would be beneficial for the common population. And it's really about asking those questions. And really, nothing exists for no reason. There's a reason why everything exists. It could be a good reason, bad reason, immoral, very moral, amoral. And it's a matter of understanding the things that cause that to be. And I say, it is a matter of that. But what is the matter of that? Well, like I said, it's about understanding human nature. Why it is that humans create certain things over others. Why it is that we prioritize some toys over other, or some concepts, philosophies or over another. And then you can hop that up all the way up the levels of abstraction to saying, okay, what is the purpose of religion? Going from Rubik's Cube to religion, and what is the significance of that? So being able to question is what's really going on here. And that's what helps me with reading, is perspective taking, saying, why does this person think the way they do? What is the combination of their experience and arguments which are causing them to think this way? And what can I learn as a result of that? Can I transfer that into my life somehow? And usually the answer is yes, because whether it's a case of a positive or negative example, it's an example I either want to model myself on or not model myself on. It's educational somehow. You can tie it back in. So that's the importance of questioning, is understanding what's going to be better for yourself and those which rely upon you and those upon which you rely. Back to the book here. This is one excerpt that I just put some arrows and it's just a whole paragraph and there actually is no annotation. I do that probably once a book, once every 2 or 3 books, when I see something, maybe it is closer to just once a book, where I see something that's so self-explanatory and simultaneously and proportionally insightful that I just feel the need to point it out. And I don't even want to add anything onto it. It's the few moments when I can say, this is a good quote, just a straight up quote to think about. So let's see what this one is. The next stage, theory, has its own specialists. They are the bad academics, full of answers to other people's questions. They teach the answer first and assume the question. Knowledge for its own sake is what motivates these people. They are fact collectors who know a lot but have, in a fuller sense, learned little. I have a friend who turns every conversation into a lecture on anything. He has read a lot and forgotten nothing and is eager to share it with anyone who will listen. At last, I have learned how to enjoy his company, to come with a question which I want an answer to, which he can always provide. So this is an interesting dichotomy here, because this is, of course, a trap that I don't want to fall into, just being that guy who's read a lot and hasn't learned and hasn't really applied anything. And I've known a couple of people like this throughout my time, which seem to have a fascination with epistemology, with thinking about what is right in this instance, what is correct, what is the most accurate assessment, what is the right breakdown, when that's not the priority or what's generally appropriate or called for in that moment. Maybe something is appealing to the other person or to voicing an opinion instead of just getting to what's quote unquote true. And if you read a lot, this can be a trap that's easier and easier to fall in, because you can say, "Oh, I've read this. I've read this in these 3 sources, and so this is how I know it's true." And while that's important to know, and while I also value that, that has to be backed up with experience. That has to be backed up with, and I know this to be true because this relates to an experience in my life of this that was actually very traumatic, and I confronted my dark side on that matter, and this is what I learned on how to overcome that and be a more compassionate person. It's like, okay, this person has had an experience that is substantiated with something that they know experientially to be true, as they know to be knowledgeably true, and can put that out in the world in a way that seems like it is backed up by something meaningful rather than just information in a vacuum. So it's important to use what you read in your everyday life and to say, oh, okay, this is a concept that I'm conceptually familiar with. How do I translate that into something that I'm functionally familiar with? So that's the trick, and that's the priority. Otherwise, when you speak, people really aren't going to listen so much. Now, this is continuing on in 2 pages later, two sheets of paper later, where I have my whole book stickied. You know, usually I just use my little Post-it flags at the top of my book. And then whenever I run out of a color, I just move on. I just use the same color because, hey, this was important, so I'm pointing it out. And then whenever I run out, I just move on to the next color. But this is one where I had enough green stickies for the whole book, but that one I just read and this one I'm about to read right now are an orange, and then it goes back to green. So I clearly in the past deliberately pointed these 2 out, and this is another one which is just me pointing out this excerpt with no personal annotation. So I'm gonna read a little bit in advance of this annotation so we can get the context here. He's talking here on a proper selfishness. This is a responsible selfishness. I'm often tempted to observe that the Christian injunction to love one's neighbor as oneself gives the neighbor a rather poor deal, since few people seem to love or even like themselves that much. Unfortunately, however, self-hate or just a lack of some positive self-regard is no way to start learning. I'm not advocating a narcissistic self-indulgence. I'm suggesting, on the basis of good evidence, that those who learn best and most and change most comfortably are those who A, take responsibility for themselves and for their future, B, have a clear view of what they want that future to be, C, want to make sure that they get it, and D, believe that they can. It looks easy. It seldom is. So boom, that's what you get there. Those are your 4 tenets of, I think it just goes back to the maturity I was mentioning earlier. How is it that you take the most advantage of life and learn? And how do you change in a way that is more rapid than you could otherwise achieve and that comes with greater ease? And that is by following these 4 things: taking responsibility, having a clear view, being sure that you get it, and believing that you can. And this is a concept which I've come to learn slowly over time. Even just reading this in an A, B, C, and D format, yeah, it puts it out there, and you're getting the information, but without actually going through that, you're not having a full grasp of this is not possible. And I say that because standing from the point of view of being before in a time when I was not doing the first step, which is taking responsibility for myself and my future. And once I started doing that is when the clear view came, and then making sure that I actually wanted to get towards that, and then saying, actually, you know what? I can work towards this in a way, and I can actually get there. So it arrives in that order, as well as is prioritized in this order. And it really comes down to the simplest things. Taking responsibility for yourself and for your future, because it can come down to the simplest thing of just taking care of what you look like. I think that is probably one of the top most important things that you can do, is squaring away your appearance. And that's not to say that you have to buy expensive clothing and look like you're the CEO of a company, but making sure that you're doing the best that your conditions can allow. You could have not that much money, but you can say, hey, I have this old sewing machine around that I got from my mom, and I have all of these frumpy clothes. Let me alter my clothes let me learn how to sew and alter my clothes so I feel good in them. And let me make sure that I don't stink when I leave the house. And let me make sure that my shirt's tucked in properly and my belt is not loose and my shoes are shined and I've lint rolled my stuff, and I didn't look like I just rolled out of a construction zone. And people look like that sometimes, and sometimes that isn't exactly correlative to how this person takes care of their life generally. But I think there is a certain cognitive correlation. It may not be causational, but certainly correlational, that when you see somebody that is ensuring that their appearance is squared away, it means that they have the capacity to take care of themselves, which means that their competency is open to take care of more than that. So to take care of their immediate environment, immediate surroundings, like making sure their room is clean, and then making sure their house is clean, and then making sure their relationships are in order. And then another circle outside of that is making sure that they are carrying those responsibilities and that ethic of responsibility into their workplace, and then into how they tie their relationships in with their workplace, in with their personal life, and then their community, and then their country, and then the world. And that it works concentrically like that. And you'll find very rarely, I think, someone who is so abjectly neglectful of themselves, which has achieved an incredible amount in life. There's a very small correlation between those two things. So take care of yourself. Take responsibility for yourself and for your future. Have a clear view of what you want to be, of what you want that future to be. Want to make sure that you can get it and believe that you can. That's the takeaway here. Back to the book here. Self-doubt is pernicious. Humble, self-doubting people may ask the questions, but they do not press for answers or for action. Others need or deserve it more than I, they say, seeking always the back of the line, even if the line is really only a huddle. John needs my help. The firm cannot spare me. My needs can wait. The unselfishness is laudable often, but the learning gets postponed. Other people become a prop for or an excuse for our lack of self-responsibility. Self-doubters often fear success. Success puts more pressure on them to take more responsibility for even more action. Failure for some is easier to handle, particularly if you plan for it. David, his teachers noted, although a clever boy, had stopped working some months before his exams. They tried to coax him back to work with forecasts of what he might achieve. They tried to frighten him with forecasts of what he might not achieve. Nothing worked. And once again, I have that paragraph leaking into another annotation, so I'll hold off on that for a moment. And this is what I think about success, fearing success, self-doubt, and doubt in general. And it's that you explore these concepts and come to terms with them through writing. And it's important to write out what it is that you want to succeed, what it is that you fear, what it is that you don't want your life to be. Because it is through those that you learn the inverses. If you learn what you want, if you understand what defines your own success, you can, it's important to, but also it's important to do it directly, overtly, but it also suggests what it is that defines a lack of success. And what it is you fear versus what it is that is attractive and comfortable to you, in both the positive and negative sense of comfortable. And what it is that you doubt, and therefore what it is that you're not doubting. What is it that you're taking for granted? So that's something that writing can do, and that writing will do if you take it seriously. And that is a matter of self-doubting. That's a matter of allowing your inner critic or your unconscious events and thoughts to rise into consciousness and inspect them and see why they came up and what you have to do to resolve them, what the right course of action is. Because there is the opposition to that, which is always trying to be correct, not self-doubting. It's saying what I'm doing right now is good. And in that biome, no learning is occurring. What you want to do is inspire growth, not rigidity. So continuing along with that paragraph, nothing worked. And this was I believe this was for Charles Handy, the author's son, David, was a son in school. He's talking about his experience. He did as badly as they feared, but he had his excuse. He had done no work. His failure was not an indictment of his ability, but only of his attitude. His own conception of himself as a clever lad was untouched. They call it a form of attribution theory. It is a way of dodging failure, of not learning in order to protect a fragile sense of self. He won't start to learn again until he is strong enough in his self-confidence to take success or failure in his stride. And that's exactly what's going on there, is this total rejection of it is responsibility. Because if you fail a test and you don't study for it, you can say, well, of course I failed a test. I didn't study. But that's ultimately an excuse, because you are using your failure to be proactive as a reason for why something didn't work out, why you didn't pass that exam. And that's easy. That's the comfort zone, is you're at no fault because it's not like you tried to make it otherwise. But the point is that you have to try to make it otherwise. You have to make the attempt to render the best possible result for yourself, and you will fail miserably often. And that's the point of what it means to exist as a human, because a lot of life is oppression and misery and wading through the mud and having what seems like an indefinitely thick fog surrounding your vision, and makes it seem like you are in an isolated bubble of trying to exist in a content way. And you can say there is all that exists out there, and I'm not going to engage with it because that's a lot. And hey, fair enough. There's a lot out there which is quite heavy. But what that means when you eschew that, and when you sideline that whole conceptualization of what it means to go to exist from one second to the next, that means you're not valuing it, and that means that you find no value in yourself. And there's no value in anything, because if nothing's worth pursuing, nothing's worth changing, then you can't say that anything is worth experiencing. So it is to say that all of that exists, and I'm going to try to do something about it. And it is assuming that responsibility of looking into those dark corners of the room that I was mentioning earlier, and throwing some light into those corners, which makes life itself valuable. So you have to make those confrontations. And this is something that can be done effectively in the workplace, which is by not chastising someone, because somebody can be in that state where it could not even be intentionally. It could not be something as intentional as not studying for an exam, as to not feel bad about failing it, but trying to do something right and doing it incorrectly or making a mistake. It's not to chastise them. It is to forgive them and allow them to correct in the future. So, let's return to the book. The choice of word is deliberate. And the choice of word here that he's referring to is subsidiarity, because he's talking about organizations and how they are structured and organized. And it comes back from a Roman Catholic church. That's the background of it. And the characteristic of this philosophy is subsidiarity holds that, as it says in the book, subsidiarity holds that It is an injustice, a grave evil, and a disturbance of right order for a large and higher organization to arrogate to itself functions which can be performed efficiently by smaller and lower bodies. To steal people's decisions is wrong. So I'll just continue on with the excerpt here. That's the background, and this is what we want to look at. The choice of word is deliberate because the sense of morality implied by it is crucial to its working. Subsidiarity means giving away power. No one does that willingly in organizations, yet the federal organization will not work unless those in the center not only have to let go of some of their power, but actually want to do so, because only then will they trust the new decision makers to take the right decisions, and only then will they enable them to make them work. They have, therefore, to believe that this is an essentially good thing to do. They have to feel good in themselves about it because they have done the good thing. It is only too easy in organizations to create negative, self-fulfilling prophecies and to delegate with the secret knowledge that it won't work because the individual to whom you have delegated does not have the right information or access to it, cannot mobilize the resources to implement any decisions, and is inadequately trained for the new responsibilities. It would, of course, be an irresponsible manager who delegated under these circumstances, but we can all act irresponsibly when we act reluctantly. To be effective, delegation requires a positive will to trust and to enable, and a willingness to be trusted and enabled. A positive, self-fulfilling prophecy, a moral act, subsidiarity. Wow, this is very important. Delegation is one of the most central aspects to an effective organization because that encourages the free thinking and liberal expression of the people involved. That's what you want in an organization. If you have a whole bunch of people following exactly what they're told to do because the person above them told them to do it in that specific way, what happens is you get people who follow the orders, and that's it. And they're not going to be inspired to figure out how to do things in their own way. They're not going to want to come up with new solutions because they know that if they try and propose that, the people are just going to push it aside and do it the old-fashioned way anyway, and that, hey, it doesn't actually even feel good presenting new ideas to these people because they're going to tear me to shreds for no reason anyway and tell me why my idea is stupid and tell me that that's not the way they do things. So what's even the point? And I've been in that situation before where, of course, I've changed and grown as time passes when it comes to my professional development and work ethic. But there was a point when I thought, hey, I'm a proactive worker that wants to do the right thing and wants to go above and beyond. And I've been in workplaces before where I say, hey, I have a little bit of knowledge about how this is done. I made these changes based on my experience and my knowledge of what I think is the right thing to do. And that was met with a rejection, saying, essentially, no, that's wrong. Do it this other way instead. And then at that point, I fell into that habit more so than I was before over time of just following orders, of just getting the exact directions of what I need to do, following the exact directions, and then iterating on that until the task is complete. So it can really stifle an organization. And the organizations that I've been in, which have featured that type of culture, atmosphere, aura, I think culture is the best word for it, because this excerpt is really talking about decentralized command. You're handing out the command to other places. You're not keeping it nuclear. You are diverting it to other sources, other people, other areas, which is an important thing to do. And the organizations with which I've experienced which seem to be less successful than the more successful, the reasons for their lack of success over the other organizations I've participated in is this lack of decentralized command, is this lack of, hey, you could possibly have a better, it's walking into a room, a conversation saying, your idea is probably better than mine. Your idea has a unique perspective that is more suited to this situation than what I could have come up with. So let me hear your idea and let's see how it best works for this situation. Rather than walking into a room saying, okay, I've been doing this for the past 10 years. This is how I know it's to be done. This is how we're going to end up doing it anyway. I'm just going to listen to what they have to say just to make them feel good, but I know what they're going to come up with really isn't that valuable anyway. When you have that perspective is when, you start a company in 2021 and it stays that way indefinitely because you're not allowing new ideas to be proposed and implemented. And the successful organizations I've seen are the ones that say, we're not doing enough to change enough. We need to change more, and we need to figure out ways to bring about those changes. And what do you have to say about those changes? What do you think those changes are? And how do you think we should get there? It's about involving the people and making them feel like their voice really has an impact on how the company should express its professional and moral obligations to the community. Back to the book here. Well, actually, let me include one more thought on that because I have something brewing here. And it's referring to delegation. When delegating a task, ensure the person or group has both the training and resources to mobilize actions. So you can ask other people however much you want on what changes should occur and why they should occur and what has to be done towards that. But if they don't have the training or resources available to them to inspire that change in any tangible way, then your efforts are going to be mostly trivial. So otherwise, your attempt is wasted, and the doers, and you blame the doers for their incompetency rather than your failure to strategize. And that can happen where you can get almost there, where you can start asking these questions, but then you don't actually provide for those to be realized or materialized. And you don't have a plan for how that can be implemented. It's one thing to implement, it's another thing to have a plan of implementation. And one is necessary for the other. They are interdependent. So moving on here. Organizations are not by nature forgiving places. Mistakes are magnified by myth and engraved in reports and appraisals to be neither forgotten nor forgiven. Organizational halos are for sinners as well as for saints and last for a long time. The new manager must be a different manager. He, and increasingly she, must use what in psychological jargon is called reinforcement theory, applauding success and forgiving failure. He or she must use mistakes as an opportunity for learning, something only possible if the mistake is truly forgiven, because otherwise the lesson is heard as a reprimand, not an offer for help. Again, I'm sure we can all think of a time where we've had a work experience where we wanted to make a better change because the person that was talking to us about our actions, our behavior, our choices said, "Hey, this is the choice that you made. I understand your thought process. What it could have been, correct me if I'm wrong, but you could have thought, because the overall mission is this is the adjustment I need to make towards that goal. And then, well, first you would ask them, what do you think about that was the right thing to do? What do you think about that was the wrong thing to do? But then it's also, okay, that's perfectly fine. Everything you did there, you didn't just do it blindly. You had your reasoning. I'm grateful that you did that. What I think, again, you ask them first, and then you can say, hey, what I also think would have been helpful in that situation is adjusting your wording in your email a little bit, and that would have made you come off less aggressive, and then the client would have had a more pleasant response and actually would have went with our suggestion for what to do on this project rather than him spitting out to us what he wants us to do. So it is to that end which I believe that flourishment follows forgiveness. When it comes to the general health of a mutual goal, this could be at the workplace, in a relationship, anything. He talks about relationships in this book also, is that you need to forgive first and then think about what it is, what the consequences of that action or that set of actions was, and what that implies for later on, so you can adjust. It all comes from having the whole circular understanding there. I mentioned this is something that I just want to throw out there, which is an interesting take on relationships, which I think is wise, which I think would be wise to implement. And this is how it goes, where he talks about marriage and how in a lot of developed countries, there's a high divorce rate. And what does that imply for how we're going about marriage? There's clearly something wrong where it's resulting in so many miserable failures. So how do we correct for that? And he says, well, maybe it shouldn't be till death do us part. It's like, let's look at this every few years. Let's take every 6 years, and it could be something like using a system that's already in place, like renewing your vows. Let's renew our vows every 6 years and say, hey, am I happy with the direction in life that I've been pursuing? Am I happy with the direction in life that you, my partner, has been pursuing? Have those directions been mutually beneficial for our well-being and flourishment, and possibly the flourishment of our immediate family, and possibly the flourishment of our children? What are we doing here? Is it working? Should we still be together? Are we still happy with each other? And it goes back to what he was saying earlier, which is you got to question, and you have to continuously question, because a lot of divorce is a slow burn that ends in an explosion. It's like a wick that burns for years and finally gets to the bomb and goes off. And suddenly it's like that book, but I forgot what it is, but what it's called, but it's a children's book about a little boy that notices a dragon, and he notices the dragon, so he pets it sometimes and tells his mom about it. His mom says there are no dragons. And when the mom ignores it more is when the dragon gets bigger. And eventually the dragon gets so big, it gets bigger than the house, and is wearing the house like a shirt and runs off down the street. The dad comes back from work and the house isn't there anymore. And that's literally how it happens. Because it can happen as immediately as you have not been conducting your marriage in the right way. You come back from work one day, and all of a sudden, but not so all of a sudden, your wife and child is not there anymore. And so your household has been totally disassembled, totally fallen apart. So how is it that you prevent that? It's by looking critically at what you're doing. So I found that concept interesting. There are a couple other concepts regarding marriage that he brought up. I just thought that one was worth pointing out. So let's return to the book here. This is talking about leadership, and he's talking a lot about vision. And I could read multiple pages of this at a time because I just love reading about leadership, and it's just multiple pages dedicated to what the leader should do. But I will highlight this. I will highlight this one, which is about the leader's vision. So here it is. The leader must live the vision. He or she must not only believe in it, but must be seen to believe in it. It is tempting credulity to proclaim a crusade for the impoverished from a luxury apartment. Effective leaders, we are told, exude energy. Energy comes easily if you love your cause. Effective leaders, again, have integrity. Integrity, being true to yourself, comes naturally if you live for your vision. In other words, the vision cannot be something thought up in the drawing office. To be real, it has to come from the deepest parts of you, from an inner system of belief. The total pragmatist cannot be a transforming leader. This is something, oh my gosh. It's amusing at this point how many times I see this concept throughout books, which is the most gratifying reassurance, which is that you're not a leader from 9 to 5. No 9 to 5 leader exists. Those are the biggest phonies. Those are the people that you have to avoid. If you're going into an organization, let's say you're interviewing for a place, and your spidey senses go off, and you can intuit that, hey, these, it seems like they're talking about all this, but in the interview, so as to make me feel comfortable and make me think I'm getting a good deal here, their website doesn't talk anything about this. When they say these things, they just seem like just catchphrases that, when I ask them about their life, it doesn't seem like they're actually doing this in their life. It seems like this is just something that they think they should believe. So this is what they're going through. I've had this experience where one of my previous bosses was a facsimile of a real leader in a way, because he would oftentimes use expressions that come from the military environment and things that to keep in mind in the everyday workplace as to be the best employee of that organization you could be. And you would try and reverse engineer that back on to his life, and you would see that the puzzle piece does not fit into the whole puzzle, that there are empty shapes there. And that is the most uninspiring thing to see, is for your leader to say, this is what you should believe and this is what you should do, and does not obviously do it himself or herself. So it's important to keep an eye out for that. If your leaders say this is how you should conduct yourself, you should be able to reverse that and say, this is how I should communicate with my higher ups. This is how it works in this organization. What are the methods that you use to make sure that you're ensuring you're using the most appropriate communication in those instances? What are the things that you're mindful of? How do you pay attention to your tone? How do you pay attention to your diction when you're speaking to them or writing something down or sending them a message such that you're being appropriate in that context? And they should be able to have an answer of that because if they don't have an answer, that means that they're not being mindful of those things, which means that they're not even questioning what they're doing. They're just doing something just to do it. And that's a problem. That introspection, that reflection is important for a leader. A leader's vision is not to convey to the team the reason for completing the goal, but to demonstrate why the goal is good. It's not enough to sit there and say, "Hey guys, this is what we're going to do." because the boss said so. But it's rather to say, hey guys, this is what we're going to do. And I am doing this because this is why what we're trying to accomplish is important in the first place. And if we all want to be a part of something that's important, these are the roles that should be filled in order to accomplish that. So it's about outlining a greater order for why a set of actions, why a goal is pertinent to a value that is more highly esteemed in that group. Understand everything as to understand everything, to the end of ameliorating all your relationships. What I mean by that is to be able, so there's a set of knowledge that is going to be relevant to you in your workplace, home life, relationships, etc. And there's going to be knowledge that's not directly applicable to that. What's important is to pay attention to that knowledge that's not directly applicable, or what you think may not be directly applicable, because it is through analogy that we understand the importance of what we know. That's why we have analogy. That's why we have metaphor. That's why we say things like, well, I say things like literacy is a superpower. Do superpowers actually exist? Well, in a comic book sense, superpowers don't literally exist. But in terms of what they do for you, what certain behavior or action can do for you, yes, they can be a superpower. So we analogize the strength, potency, importance of a concept to something that is not literally true in real life, as to make it clear as to what's going on. So you need to be able to, so it's important to understand everything that is both relevant and irrelevant to you, as to understand everything that's going on to you directly. And then through analogy, through metaphor, you can weave that in. You know, I found that that's one of the reasons why fiction exists as a genre is because fiction is a distillation of real life. It is a means of using symbols so far steeped in the mythology of human beings in the history of existence that goes back millions of years, billions of years, that tells us something about how we should live the world and how we do live the world. Wisdom in its natural form, as a web of connected modules of experience, applies to identifying, evaluating, and responding to a person's behavior. So what we learn from these directly relatable sources and not directly relatable sources, it informs us on how we should act individually and what we should pay attention to in other people's behavior. So the question you can ask yourself when trying to determine the applicability of what you know and how you're using it is, how does your vision encourage other people to want the lives of others to flourish? So it's not even wanting other people to better themselves. It's wanting other people to want to better other people. And that's really when the magnanimous, stellar progression of society becomes beautiful in its nature, is not when people want others to succeed. It's when people want others to want others to succeed, because then it just propagates. This is actually the third instance in the book when I have not offered any annotation and have in fact pointed out a single sentence here. And this is something I personally relate to, and I think and it's a trend which has both positive and negative connotations. And it's the following. He labels this subsection, the culture of consent. And the first sentence is the following. Intelligent people prefer to agree rather than to obey. And you find this in major organizations, not just major organizations, but organizations in which you're not going to find anyone with an IQ below 100. It's just one of those professions or one of those lines of work that requires a certain cognitive capacity that is not within purview of somebody who didn't get hooked up in the realm of raw cognitive power in life. You know, some people are better off in the cognitive department. Some are better off in the emotional, in the physical, in the kinesthetic and proprioception department. People are hooked up in different ways, in different amounts. So when you get to organizations that just require skill sets that are going to be above that, you're going to get, I think, what he's defining here as what an intelligent person is. And he says intelligent people prefer to agree rather than obey. What that means is they want to know why something is important, why something is the goal, why the goal is good. That sequence is necessary for these quote intelligent people to go along with what they're doing, because part of what defines intelligence is the ability to apprehend complexity. There are other segments to it too, but you need to be able to apprehend complexity in order to synthesize it, boil it down to something understandable and personally relatable, and then execute it, reuse it, recycle it into behavior in real life. But first you need to have the apprehension. So that apprehension, that scratch is itched by giving the why, by explaining to your team why you're doing what you're doing. And that will gain greatest confidence and the most effort that those people are going to put forth. Back to the book here. It is worrying from many points of view. So that's how the paragraph opens. He is referring to the subsection which he's in called A World to Worry About, talking about the number of jobs and hours worked for jobs and how organizations manage that, and the relationship between how much people are working versus how hard they're working. He says the new rich will not have the time or the energy to enjoy their riches. The leisured class will be those at the bottom of the heap rather than those at the top, the upside down world. Because he's saying that the people who are better at doing things are going to have to do more things and are therefore going to be able to enjoy their time less that they have outside of work because they're working too much. And that there is I don't know if this would exactly be a Pareto distribution, but something of the sort. He says half the people paid double, working twice as hard and producing 3 times as much has to be good sense. Because think about that. You have the bottom, let's just think about it as the bottom 50% of your organization and the top 50% of your organization, where there are going to be people that are putting in a lot more effort than others. And in fact, it's something quite different. That proportion is actually more extreme. It's more like the top 10% of the employees at an organization are doing the top 90% of the work. And it's a really, really extreme disproportional attribution like that. I don't know the exact numbers, but that's close to it. So this is the upside down world in which he's speaking right now. So back to the book. It is worrying from many points of view. It could be a society obsessed with wealth creation with too little regard to the way that wealth is either spent or distributed. In the end, all societies are remembered more for the way they spend their wealth than for how they made it. The great civilizations of the past are remembered today for what they did with their wealth, for the monuments they left behind, for their great buildings, major public works, great art or great conquests, for education or great social reforms. The pursuit of efficiency and effectiveness in our organizations has got to be a means to something even greater. But if those with the wealth have no time or no thought for its proper spending, then we could end up with a society preoccupied only with getting and never with giving or creating. I think that's one of the problems between the West and the East. Now, you do have things in the East. For example, you look at Japan with the salaryman who, at the beginning of his career, chooses one company and stays with it for the rest of his life, and is a major decision, and a lot of people are miserable as a result of that. And you have its contrast in the West with I need to. So you have that presence in the East, but it is a more introverted attention put towards inner feeling, whereas the West is more extroverted. And how can we validate things based on external stimuli? And in this case, it would be validating my existence through external wealth, through monetary wealth. And both extremes, of course, have to be viewed with a questioning eye. And both the increase in workplace demand and people with post-secondary education has spawned what is now known as the hustle culture. Is this lack of leisure going to ostracize part of the population? Because there are people who want to get after it, and there are the cruisers. There are people who just want to cruise. They say, hey, I'm doing what I need to do. I'm happy. And that's all that matters. So with this hustle culture, it also suggests a potentially pernicious way of going about work, which is all on all the time. And that is not mentally balanced, mentally stable. You will destabilize yourself by thinking in that way and in acting that way. So be sure to exert yourself to further than your capacity, but do not have ambition outside of your capacity. Know what it is that you can achieve and push that, but don't be foolhardy. And this is something you can learn to do only through experience. Part of teaching me what it is that is outside of my capacity safely versus being a fool is this concept that David Goggins originated called recertification that I subscribe to, where once a year I do something that I don't think I could, or frankly even I should do, but is so absurd and is such a great feat, such that afterward it allows me to reach into that collection, reach into that drawer and pull those things out for when I say I can't do this or I can't accomplish this. It's saying, hey, you've done something similar in the past to an absurd degree. So my first recertification was also something that David Goggins came up with, which is the 4x4x48, which is running 4 miles every 4 hours over the course of 48 hours. And I also did the 4 on the last 48 hours as well. I'm not sure if you're supposed to do that, but I ultimately ended up running 52 miles. So it's the equivalent of 2 marathons in 2 days. And that gave me incredible physical confidence in overcoming things like, oh, I'm tired right now. I can't do this run. I can't do this workout. And I think to myself, excuse me, you can't do what? It's not even looking at someone else saying, oh, David Goggins did this or this other person accomplished this, so I can do it too. I've literally done this myself before. And the following year, I wanted to flip that on its head and do something more mental based. Of course, doing something as physically intense as that is inherently mental, but I went more on the traditional colloquial mental side by doing a 24-hour meditation that was fasted and had special conditions on it that made it slightly torturous, and it trains your brain to want to be able to overcome those things which you don't think you can. So it's important to work hard and to have those aspirations, but not to be so culturally to intoxicate the culture in the society you're in such a negative way. So back to the book here. This is actually really interesting because I literally recorded this for the last podcast. This was not planned at all. I must make that admission. But in this segment, he's talking about Howard Gardner's 7 Intelligences. And I covered Howard Gardner's book on the previous podcast of how his 7 intelligence, it was a book that he wrote on how his theory of 7 intelligences, of multiple intelligences, can be implemented in the school system K through 12 as to improve it. So he gives, so Handy here in the book gives a bit of a preface, and he goes through the 7. So that's what I'll do here. Society today sieves people in their late teens. The clever ones go on to further studies and qualifications. The rest are left to fend for themselves. We only use one sieve, that of intellectual achievement, as measured by examinations. People are interviewed, it is true, by some universities and colleges, but you only get to be interviewed if you have passed through that first intellectual sieve. Upside-down thinking regards this as nonsense. We need more talents than the intellect, important though that is. Talent, we know, has many faces. So does intelligence. Howard Gardner, a professor at the Harvard School of Education, took the trouble to classify 7 different types of intelligence, which he claims we can actually measure. Based on his analysis, but stretching it a little, we can come in a common sense way recognize that some distinct sorts of intelligence or talent in people, even at a young age. 1. Analytical intelligence, the sort we measure in IQ tests in most examinations. 2. Pattern intelligence, the ability to see patterns in things and to create patterns. Mathematicians, artists, and computer programmers often have this intelligence to a high degree. It is important to realize that the talents are not connected or correlated. It is possible to be very intelligent in a pattern sense and to fail all conventional exams. 3. Musical intelligence. Some musicians, pop stars, for example, are analytically clever, but many are not. Musically intelligent people, they undoubtedly are. 4. Physical intelligence. Swimmers, footballers, sports stars, and all sorts have this talent in abundance. It is no guarantee of the other talents. Practical intelligence. The sort of intelligence that can take a television to bits, put it back together again without instructions, but might not be able to spell the names of the parts. 6. Intrapersonal intelligence. The person, often the quiet one, who is in tune with feelings, their own and others, the poets and the counselors. 7. Interpersonal intelligence. The ability to get on with other people, to get things done with and others through. It is the skill that managers have to have in addition to one or other of the first 2 types. And the first 2 types were analytical and pattern intelligence. So, perfect segue, honestly, to summarize what it's like to adapt oneself to discontinuity, as well as to make themselves effective in their organizations, whether it is through the education system they're in or the professional company organization they're in. And you can think about multiple intelligences and how they apply to you in order to see how your strengths can be catered to, your weaknesses can be ameliorated, and your habits can change for the better. And thinking about this from the educational background, each student should be encouraged to pursue and practice with the direction of educators their form of intelligence. Each of us should not be constrained by one axis of intelligence or wisdom, which is everything that we're talking about in the previous book, is what it means to be constrained by an educational system and what could be changed about that. So if that's something that appeals to you, check it out. Back to the book here. Negative capability is this subsection. The learning organization must cultivate its negative capability. Disappointment and mistakes are part of change and essential to learning. How big a mistake can you now make without them stopping you first? I asked a young friend who was boasting of his new promotion. I was suggesting that real responsibility entailed the risk of big mistakes. Learning organizations start by giving space, large donuts in my language. Large donuts mean discretionary space which will sometimes be misused. A learning organization will try to turn those mistakes into learning opportunities, not by using them as sticks to beat with, but as case studies for discussion. So I think that's a real simple, straightforward explanation there of what it means to have your team and have your organization flourish, is by providing people the space to fail and by transforming those failures into benefit for the individual, the team, and the company. This is a strong sentiment, I think, in support of reading. It gives you an ever-increasing amount of ways which you may use to reframe a situation of your own. A perfect example is the book we're reading right now, which is all about discontinuous upside-down thinking. How do you take the perspectives of others? How do you take Charles Handy's perspective and the experiences he had and what he's learned from other people, so that when a situation comes up in my own life, when I got to make a decision between acting one way and acting another, that I can be sure I am basing that on something that I know to be somehow valuable. It's like, I really like this analogy of education, of going into class and the teacher invariably saying that the reading, you're supposed to do the reading of the chapter before the class. You don't go to the lecture. You don't show up to class, learn the lesson, and then go home and read the chapter that she was teaching that day. You actually read it in advance so that you have the base level of familiarity there. And she's going to talk some level on the base level of familiarity. And she's also going to talk on the higher level stuff. And when you have that background basis, you can then raise more important, complex, interesting things into question and discuss them. And the same thing applies to real life. You know, what teachers tell you in school really helps in everyday situations, because if you take someone who doesn't read and has a very low exposure to other perspectives, when they encounter a situation, they're just going to do what their instinct says, and 90% of the time, that's probably going to be wrong. But when you cultivate this understanding of how other people operate, that better informs your decision. You pave a path toward self-immolation by following what other people do. This is true. You can't error-free emulate other people's lives and expect that to work out for you, because their life is not yours. But what you can do is look at their habits and their decisions and model your behavior on how they made that work for them. So back to the book here. He's talking about taxes now. he discusses a variety of things. And this is actually coming full circle, because this is one of the first points I made, and I said, I don't know if I talked about this later on, but this is exactly what I was mentioning earlier about the workplace and time relative to experience, and how that can be balanced, and how as you get closer to one, you need to dedicate less to the other, and be compensated equally, or perhaps that's one way of organizing the workplace. So back to the book here. We cannot devise more ways to use the intelligence. I had the wrong inflection there. Can we not devise more ways to use the intelligence and the experience of the people in their third age to help in these ancillary areas? So he talks about 3 ages. I don't remember exactly what they are, but essentially the first age is when you're an up and coming professional and you're learning the way of how to do things. And then the second is when you're kind of the second phase, the middle age, is when you are more in kind of exertion production mode, and you're competent at what you're doing and approximating mastery. And then in your third age is when essentially you're at retirement age, and you have all this knowledge and all this experience that you can impart, but you're, I guess, physically less competent, or you just can't contribute much, generally speaking. So returning here. As a part of their portfolio, it would be of interest to many people in their 50s to have a part-time relationship with a doctor's practice, with a school, with a solicitor, or in a parish. Some of this already happens. There are counselors in some surgeries, teaching assistants in some primary schools. We need more of them as the full-time professionals get busier, and they need to be given a more formal status and the necessary training. So skipping a paragraph, Upside Down Thinking would like these roles to be properly certified and licensed with required training procedures, rather than regarded as ad hoc voluntary help. In this way, the public would feel reassured, and the helper would feel properly recognized and qualified. It would enrich the portfolio of many a middle-aged person and enrich our society. So this is a lovely concept here he's talking about, where as you get older, let's say you're at retirement age, you don't need to work as much. It's not a matter of just stopping working, but it's, what is it that I can do that requires less of my time that would actually enhance the lives of other working professionals? So you could go back and you could be an assistant for a teacher. And you could be older than the teacher. The teacher's younger than you, but you're the one that's learning from them because you were in medicine that entire time. You don't know anything about education. And you're a retired doctor, but you still want to involve yourself in something. Boom, teacher's assistant, or any of the other examples that he gave. You could become a paralegal, and you could dedicate your time toward that. I mean, that would be a whole nother degree. Can't just kind of pick that up very easily, but there is that concept there. And I think that would be great if we lived in a society and a culture where we're constantly seeing older people reinvesting their time and efforts into pursuits which provide prosperity for the community. That would be lovely. It's like, hey, I can't wait till I'm old and I'm done working, and I just get to go back. I can be an apprentice to a biologist in a lab and just help them do whatever, and that could be fulfilling to me. So there are a lot of ideas in this book. Of course, I have to say that you're not getting everything by listening to this right here. If you really want to get the full sense of what this upside down discontinuous thinking he's suggesting, there's a lot more in the book than what I am leading on to here. Another thing this brings to mind to me is it makes it wiser, more likely to pay a person less if they work slower, as opposed to not hiring them in the first place, or a way of preventing firing of present employees. The working environment need not be so cutthroat. So what you can do if a person is underperforming, let's say, is, and this does happen in the workforce, is a pay cut. Is saying, hey, we hired you under these pretenses of performance, and it's been a while, and we've looked at your performance, and it seems like you're not catching up to that, and that you actually need a little bit more training and experience to be able to fulfill this role to the capacity it requires. So for the moment being, we will reduce your pay, or we will increase your required hours of working so that you can, and while your pay is fixed, so that you can catch up to where you need to be. And then at that point is when, you can re-ingratiate yourself into that role and move up from there. Instead of just saying, you're not cut out for this, walk out of my door right now and I'll bring in somebody else who can do it. And that type of environment, so that isn't necessarily a bad thing. There does come times where you need to fire people, where you've trained them the best you can, and you've educated them on what to do the best you can. You've given them room to make mistakes and make errors and try and learn from them, and they're not doing that. And you take the indirect approach towards guiding them towards a better work ethic or what is required for that role. And you take the direct approach by telling them, hey, this is not working out. You need to make these changes. These are the changes you need to make. And you can go through all of that. And then if that's still not working, you just need to make the call. And that's okay. It happens at companies all the time. And it sucks, but it's okay. But when you become trigger happy with that is when everything starts going downhill, because that type of decision implies that you're not willing to invest in the culture, which means you're not willing to invest in decentralized command, which means you want everything in one way and one way only, and that's how it's going to work. So in the workplace, if you are in charge of other people, or if other people are in charge of you, make sure that you are constantly questioning. That is the pull away theme here. In your relationships, at the workplace, with yourself, question after question yourself. Ask the question that will turn it upside down. And ask the question which will bring about a break in the continuity, create discontinuity. That's when improvisation occurs and new discoveries, philosophical or methodological, will arise. To do that, I think, as I mentioned, comes from perspective taking, comes from knowing what other people have thought in the past, as to know how to base your thinking process off that in the future. You can get that perspective taking in a variety of contexts. I think the best way to do that is through reading, and by extension writing, because literacy is a superpower. If you want to soup up your power of literacy in bite-sized manners, you can check out my Instagram, where every day I post what I'm reading, what stands out to me, and what brief point I have to make on that. So you may be able to find something a little bit interesting there, a little bit insightful. That's the goal. Hopefully you can extract out of that something you can apply to your life. Otherwise, farewell.